The rich, popular boy rejected me but ended up marrying me in the end. When I was in high school, I had the biggest crush on a boy named Lucas. He was very social and friendly with everyone and was the captain of our school's volleyball team. He came from a family of doctors and was on the right path to becoming one, too. All the girls had a crush on him because he was always friendly with them. And then there was me, completely the opposite. I grew up in a middle-class family with immigrant parents from Vietnam. My parents only gave me 3 career options: be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. The only problem with these options was that I wasn't the brightest student to even think of becoming any of them. Lucas and I were classmates in English and sat next to each other. Because of our seating arrangement, our teacher assigned us a project together, so we would meet after school to work on it. We had a week to finish our presentation, and during those days, we would meet at the public library. I was shy at first, but since Lucas was very social, he made things easier. We ended up getting along well and bonding over the silliest things. I started discovering things about him that I never would have imagined he liked. When our project was over, we still agreed to hang out afterward and got even closer. I couldn't stop thinking about him and finally gathered the courage to ask him out. One day, during one of our typical hangouts, I brought up the topic of us. He looked at me, confused, and asked what I meant. I told him I had feelings for him for a long time and asked if he wanted to be more than friends. His smile disappeared, and he said, "I'm sorry, but no." There was an awkward silence that seemed to last forever. He broke it by saying he needed to go and left. I tried texting him, apologizing for what happened, and asking if we could just forget about it. He never responded to my messages. When I saw him again in class, it was like he had erased me from his memory. During this time, my friends started going to the gym and always invited me to join them. I was never interested until they suggested I use it as a way to release my anger. It helped me get distracted, and I started eating healthily. The more I got distracted, the more I began taking care of myself and even decided to take my studies more seriously. By senior year, I was 5 feet 11 inches and weighed 180 pounds of lean muscle. I graduated and went to a university where I told my parents I was planning to go to medical school to try and become a doctor. They were very proud, and I was also proud of myself for my achievements. The first day of college went well until I went to my biology class. I sat in the closest empty seat during the lecture and found a familiar face. When I looked to the right, it was Lucas. I quickly turned away but wanted to take another look to see if that was actually Lucas. I turned around again to get a glimpse, and it was indeed him. He still looked as handsome as ever, and the feelings I had back in high school came rushing back. I wondered if he was still the same Lucas from high school, or if he had changed. I was curious, and throughout class, all I could think about was whether I wanted to talk to him or not. I decided, why not, and went ahead and talked to him. I think I scared him a little because he thought I was just a random girl. He looked at me closely, realized it was me, and then he smiled. We started with a small conversation, eventually talking about our majors and plans for the future. It was ironic how both of our plans for the future aligned. I knew the conversation would soon die out, so I asked if he had anything planned after class. He told me that his next class started in a couple of hours, so he was probably going to be at our school's union to do homework and eat lunch. Nervously, I asked if he wanted company after class, and he said sure. We started talking more and more, even visiting each other's houses to study. He became my best friend, and I was his. As much as I wanted to ask him out again, my pride wouldn't let me. I knew that if something was going to happen, he would have to make it official. After a couple of months, we decided to eat out at one of our favorite restaurants near campus. We ordered our usuals and sat next to each other. Afterwards, he looked at me and said, "So, are you going to make a move?" I was startled and started smiling. I joked, "Why do I have to make the move?" He smiled back and grabbed my hand. "Is that enough?" he asked, blushing. At this point, I was freaking out and my face probably looked like a tomato, but like any regular person, I played it cool and kept calm. I held his hand tighter and said yes. We left the restaurant holding hands and laughing together. Then I brought up high school and asked him what happened. He looked at me and apologized. He told me he had feelings for me back then but couldn't date anyone because of how strict his parents were with school, pushing him to become a doctor. He told me he had to prioritize school and couldn't let any distractions get in the way. I smiled. Finally getting the closure I needed to let go of that past. I wanted to focus on the present and my new relationship with Lucas. Years passed, and eventually we both got into med school together and ended up becoming doctors. Those years were tough, and I accumulated a lot of debt. Well, for me, anyway. My parents gave me the biggest hug after graduation, and my mom was excited that she could finally brag to her Asian friends that her daughter and son-in-law were doctors. After a couple of years, I proposed to Lucas, and he gave me 2 beautiful children. Lucas and I have been happy ever since, and recently went on vacation to the Philippines together. The first few years with Lucas were magical. We were both doctors, building our careers and raising 2 beautiful children. Life seemed perfect on the surface, but as the years went by, cracks began to show. At first, it was subtle. Lucas coming home later and later, our conversations growing shorter, and the spark that once connected us slowly fading away. At first, I tried to justify it to myself. He's just tired from work, I thought. Life is stressful for both of us. I threw myself into taking care of the kids and the household, hoping to ease his burden. I wanted everything to work out. After all, we had overcome so much to be together. But no matter how hard I tried, Lucas seemed more distant with every passing day. His absences became more frequent. Sometimes, he would disappear for hours, claiming he was stuck on call or handling emergencies at the hospital. But some of his excuses didn't make sense. Shifts that weren't on his schedule, meetings that didn't exist. One night, by chance, I saw messages on his phone from someone named Renata, a colleague from the hospital. At first, the texts were casual, but soon they turned into inside jokes and affectionate words. Confronting him felt terrifying, but I couldn't live in doubt any longer. I waited for him to come home that night, later than usual, and calmly asked, "Who is Renata?" Lucas froze for a second, then let out a deep sigh, as if he had been expecting this moment. "Just a coworker," he replied, but his expression betrayed him. I stayed silent, waiting for him to say more. "It's nothing," he added dismissively. "You're overreacting." My heart sank, but I didn't want to appear weak. I knew there was more to the story. What hurt the most was not the betrayal itself, but the indifference in his voice. I asked him if he was happy, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked to the bedroom without another word. In the days that followed, the tension between us grew unbearable. He started sleeping on the couch some nights, and I pretended it didn't bother me, though each silent moment between us was a painful reminder that the marriage I had dreamed of was falling apart. Every time his phone buzzed, my stomach twisted. Eventually, I decided to bring up the idea of separation. His reaction was cold and dismissive. "If that's what you want, fine." It felt like a punch to the gut. Years of love, sacrifice, and devotion, reduced to a mere fine. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal or his apathy. I didn't leave the house right away. I needed time to plan, especially for the kids. But what I didn't know was that Lucas was already one step ahead of me. Without my knowledge, he had filed for separation and was demanding joint custody of the children. To make things worse, he was asking for half of everything we owned, including the house and part of my savings. When I received the court notice, I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. How could he be so cruel? The same man who once held my hand, promising eternal love, now felt like a stranger determined to ruin me. The worst part? He no longer hid his relationship with Renata. They were seen together often, and the gossip spread quickly among our mutual friends. I was heartbroken, but I couldn't afford to fall apart. I had children to care for and a future to rebuild. I started going to the gym again just like I did in high school to channel my anger and keep my sanity. I also threw myself into my work, specializing in my dream medical field, determined not to let his betrayal define me. While I fought to rebuild my life, Lucas and Renata seemed to live the perfect life together. They traveled, posted smiling photos on social media, and appeared inseparable. Friends tried to console me, but I knew some were secretly happy to see my marriage fail. She thought she was so special, I overheard one of them say behind my back. After months of legal battles, we reached a settlement. Lucas got half of everything and secured joint custody of the children. Although the court wasn't on my side, I promised myself I wouldn't let it destroy me. As unfair as it all seemed, I knew my best revenge would be living well and succeeding. Years went by, and I became one of the most respected doctors in my field. I opened my own clinic and slowly rebuilt my life. My children grew up seeing the strength of their mother, and that made me proud. Meanwhile, Lucas and Renata's perfect life didn't last long. I heard from mutual friends that they had broken up after a few years. He had been cheated on just as he had cheated on me. One day, while I was having lunch with my kids, Lucas walked into the same restaurant. He was alone, looking worn out, and tried to strike up a conversation with me. He said he missed the old times and asked if we could catch up sometime. I looked at him for a moment, then smiled politely and said, "I've moved on, Lucas. I hope you find what you're looking for." He stared at me, stunned, but I stood up, holding my children's hands, and walked away. The cycle was finally complete. I no longer needed revenge or explanations. My greatest victory was moving on, leaving him trapped in the consequences of his own choices. The next few months after the divorce were difficult, but not impossible. While I dealt with the emotional weight of separation, I knew that the best way to move forward was to focus on my children and my career. However, every time I saw Lucas and Renata flaunting their relationship, pretending to be the perfect couple, a fire burned inside me. I could have just ignored it and moved on, but a part of me wanted justice. I didn't need revenge, but I wanted it. During the divorce proceedings, Lucas and Renata had acted brazenly, and everyone at the hospital knew about their relationship. What they underestimated, however, was a crucial hospital rule. Intimate relationships between staff members were strictly prohibited, especially when they created conflicts of interest. I knew that revealing the truth could cost them everything. I began gathering evidence discreetly. Even though Lucas and I no longer spoke, Renata's social media was filled with pictures and videos of the two of them, vacations, romantic dinners, and comments from coworkers congratulating the new couple. I compiled screenshots and old emails showing that their relationship had started while I was still married to Lucas. In a hospital that valued professionalism and ethics, these details were a ticking time bomb. I waited for the right moment to strike. Just before the hospital's annual performance reviews, I submitted a formal, anonymous complaint to the Human Resources Department and the board. In the report, I outlined Lucas and Renata's relationship, attaching all the evidence I had gathered. I didn't use my name or leave any clue that I was behind it. I only needed to light the spark and let the hospital handle the rest. It didn't take long for everything to unravel. Within a week, rumors began spreading through the hospital corridors. Lucas and Renata were summoned to a private meeting with the administration. The hospital had strict policies, and their affair was treated as a serious violation of the code of conduct. In the end, both were fired. Renata tried to appeal, arguing that their relationship didn't interfere with their work, but the rules were clear. Romantic involvement between coworkers, especially one kept secret, was grounds for immediate dismissal. The fall from grace was swift and brutal. Without the prestige of working at the hospital, Lucas struggled to find another job in the medical field. Despite his qualifications, the medical community is small and competitive, and word of his unethical behavior spread quickly. Hospitals and clinics didn't want to associate with someone who had violated professional boundaries. Renata managed to secure a position at a small private clinic, but the pay was much lower and her reputation was tarnished. Lucas, however, had no such luck. With no financial stability, he relied on the few connections he had left, but nobody wanted to take the risk of hiring him. Slowly, his life began to crumble, and he found himself living the unthinkable, a qualified doctor, unable to find work. Meanwhile, I focused on my career. Lucas's sudden departure left a vacancy at the hospital, and I was promoted to a leadership position in my field. Over time, I built a solid reputation, eventually opening my own clinic. My children grew up happy and healthy, watching their mother thrive despite the challenges. I was proud of the life I had rebuilt, knowing I didn't need revenge to find happiness, but it still felt good to see Lucas face the consequences of his choices. He had treated me like I was disposable, thinking he could replace me and move on without repercussions. But life doesn't work that way, and he never imagined his downfall would be so harsh. Years later, I ran into Lucas by chance. He was working at a small office doing administrative tasks and scheduling appointments, a far cry from the prestigious career he once had. When he saw me, he tried to strike up a conversation, but I cut him off with a polite smile and said, "I hope you found what you were looking for, Lucas." Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked away, holding my children's hands. The chapter was finally closed. I no longer needed revenge or explanations. My greatest victory was moving on and building the life I deserved, while Lucas remained trapped in the consequences of his own actions.